What's good, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you guys are having a great day. Before we get into today's main video, I thought that I would mention I'm giving out a 30% off discount code for the month of June on both of my online courses, including the Ponziani opening and the Hippopotamus Defense. So if you're interested in one of these courses or both, all you got to do is go down to the description below or the pinned comment, go to the link there, and yeah, whether you're interested in the Hippo or the Ponziani or both, plug in the discount code June 2024 and you will receive 30% off on those courses. See y'all in the main video. Let's get it. Today's video, we have part 2 of 4 in our Pterodactyl Defense series. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll leave a link to that down in the description below so that you can go check that out. What is the Pterodactyl Defense, if you haven't seen part 1 yet? Well, it's a response against the move of d4, in which case we're playing the modern defense. And against knight c3, we're playing c5, striking against white's center at only the 3rd move in the game, and white here with a big decision to make. In part 1, we looked at what happens if white captures on c5, which turns out to be a pretty not great move from a practical level. Today we're going to be looking at one of the options in which case white can defend the pawn on d4. Okay, there's 2 different ways that we could see this. Knight f3 we're going to be covering in part 3 of the series. Today we're going to be looking at the move of e3. In this case, I recommend you take on d4 and play knight f6. Notice what we've done here. Now, white still has a centralized pawn on d4, but they don't have an e2 pawn. They don't have an e pawn at all, but we do. By playing c5 and trading for d4 and white capturing back, we've practically traded off a c pawn for an e pawn. And pawns, especially in opening theory, the closer they are to the center, the more valuable they are. Okay, so here in this instance, we have 2 centralized pawns on the e and d files. White only has 1, and this is in our favor. We have a very nice long pawn chain, 5 and 2. Whereas white, on the other hand, has 3 and 4. And I like 5 plus 2 more than 4 plus 3. Let me know down below, though. Do you have a preference with that? Do you like a really long pawn chain and then a tiny one? Or do you kind of like them balanced out a little bit more? Or do you not really care? Or maybe you just haven't even thought of it before. And if you haven't, that's okay. But 5 pawns connected like that, a 5 plus 2 is a very nice way to go to, just a nice way to go about things. Now, you're going to see knight f3 all the time. Okay, now when we look at this move of d5 from white, the engine likes this move. And at the higher levels, you see this a little bit more often, for sure. But overall, d5 is played 3% of the time. So yes, it is a good move, but you're probably hardly ever going to see it. But nonetheless, let's cover it. Good to know what to do against it. Here, I'm recommending that we castle kingside. And yeah, against knight f3, there's a lot of things we could do here. We could play e6, chipping away. We could play d6 and then e6. Chipping away towards that pawn. I mean, if you want to take, we'll capture back with our bishop, develop quickly. We're going to be good there. If castling kingside, we can take on d5. The moment you take with the pawn, knight d7, good move. If you take with the knight, let's just keep trading. Queen captures, knight c6 is a good option. If you take with the pawn, obviously, I mean, knight c6 is just not an option now, but we can still play knight d7. And there's a ton of dark squares that we can really take good advantage of by pushing your pawn this far. You did gain space. But because of that, you know, squares like e5 and c5 are really nice outposts. And if we bring the knight to f6 or b6, that also puts direct pressure against that pawn on d5, that isolated pawn on d5. But going back to knight f3, my recommendation is this move of e5. Okay, this performs very well, and it gives black a very fun game. Okay, it might not be the most common move, but it does perform well. And when we're thinking about chess opening theory, I'm not always just looking at, okay, what's played the most? I'm looking at, okay, wait, what does the engine like? Plus, not only what the engine likes, but what performs well, okay? e5 performs well here. Black gets a lot of nice wins with this move. Let's just get this out of the gate. I mean, if you take on e6, we take with our d-pawn, okay? If you move your queen, I mean, we can just keep developing at a rapid rate. Notice the advantage in development that black has. I mean, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces developed. White only has 2 knights out. That's it. If you take our queen, we take back. We now have control of that d-file. And I'm personally a fan. I mean, maybe this is the Hippopotamus Defense player coming out of me, but I kind of like playing b6 and bishop b7. Okay. And, I mean, very active bishop on the light square here, taking over, you know, one of the 2 longest diagonals in the entire chessboard. And same with our dark squared bishop. Okay, we're controlling the 2 longest diagonals on the entire board right now. And on top of that, we're owning this d-file as well. So very active game, and the engine does like black more than white here. If we go back to the move e5, let's say white doesn't do en passant and they just keep developing. Okay, let's play d6. Let's play a move like h6. Play a move like knight bd7. Let's just start developing. And I personally like the idea. Notice there's no pawn on e4. Playing knight e8, looking towards the move of f5. Now, if you see something like queen d2, you can't drop that pawn on h6, right? So you got to play king h7 so that pawn is defended. But okay, now you can play a move like f5. We're actually threatening f4, trapping the bishop on e3. And this feels like a very fun kind of King's Indian defense type position, in which case white always has to be worried about f4 and e4 ideas. Once this e pawn moves, our bishop on g7 is going to be very active. This bishop on c8 right now, it's not doing much, but the moment this f pawn moves, it's going to be an aggressive and attacking piece as well. And there's a lot of ways that we can kind of just keep adding fuel to the flame, to the fire. I don't know. What's the terminology on that? You get the point. So yeah, I mean, I just think that's a fun game. And notice white can't force us to play either of these moves. We can kind of play them whenever we want, for whatever reason we want to. So going back to knight f6. Okay, that covers the move d5. Against that, you can castle kingside, you can play d6, and you can play e5. Fun game there. But most of the time, you're going to see a move like knight f3. Against this, d5. Let's play d5 ourselves and not allow our opponent to push. Yeah, oftentimes white will take. If something like c5, we can just develop, right? Castle kingside, knight c6, knight e4. At some point, b6, pawn b6 is a good option against that move because the queen defends it. Although I would say immediately I'd probably just castle. If something like bishop e2, okay, let's castle. Right, play knight c6. If c5, there's a lot of good moves here, including knight e4. b6 can be an option at some point. Defended by the queen, defended by our pawn, putting more pressure on the c5 pawn. And we have a very good grip on b4 at the moment. So a move like pawn b4 just can't be played. And if you take on e4, we capture back. I mean, your knight's got to move. It's got to move somewhere. And the moment that you do move it, we have queen d5. We could take on d4 right away, but why not play queen d5, defend the pawn on e4, and then play a move like h6? You can't take on e4 anymore. And if you run away somewhere like knight h3, we take, you have double isolated pawns on the king side. This is not good for white at all. And we're about to go up a pawn on top of that. I mean, this is just crushing. So yeah, I mean, we go back to that move d5. If a move like bishop e2 again, you can just castle, knight c6, knight e4 ideas. Great game there. I do want to mention this move bishop g5. Okay, and the engine here, among other moves, likes castling kingside. I personally don't love this move. You might, and that's okay. The reason I don't like it is because white can take on f6 and then play c takes d5. And black is okay here. Black is okay, but it feels like it's pretty hard to win that pawn on t5. That's why I'm not the biggest fan of it. Okay, it's going to be hard. We can play knight b6, of course. In that instance, white can play a move like queen b3, and it just feels like they're holding on to their center in a pretty direct fashion. All that being said, though, here white doesn't have to take with their pawn. Okay, they could take with the knight. I think in this case, our approach is a lot more straightforward in terms of how we're going to win that pawn back. We could play this move of bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. Okay, play a move like knight c6. Notice your pawn can't kick us around because there's a knight in front of it. And if a move like castling kingside, we can play f5. Okay, notice we got our bishop here first, knight c6, f5. We're looking to remove the defender of that pawn, right? Take that knight and then win our pawn back. And black here with a very nice game. This bishop, obviously, you can take all the time you want. You're not going to be able to defend d4 directly with your bishop, and this knight is just too far away in terms of how many moves it would take. So we're going to take on f3, and we're going to win this pawn. But again, if white takes on d5, that prevents our knight from coming here. We got to take a slower approach. Knight d7, knight b6. If you like that position, that's fine. I personally don't. So instead, against the move bishop g5, what I am recommending in this video is that you play knight e4. Okay, now the engine just slightly doesn't like this move as much. Okay, at least at first hand. Of course, the more it looks at it, it starts to see it's not so bad. But knight e4 just performs a lot better. And there's a lot more mistakes that the opponent can make, right? When we're playing chess, we want to try to make it harder on our opponent if we can. Right? I mean, why not? Why not give them opportunities to make mistakes? Why not, instead of giving them 10 moves that are good, why not give them one? Right? I mean, that's a very extreme example, but you get the idea. The most popular move online for white here is taking on d5 with the knight. That is the most popular move. Is that a good move, though? Just because something's popular, does that mean that it's good? No. In this case, we're just winning. We're over -2. We're going to take on g5, and when you take back e6, both of your knights are attacked, and you cannot say both. You might as well get something, play a crazy move like knight takes f7, but okay, we take. If you want to check us, we can run away with the king. And we got all of these squares covered, so your knight's got to run away somewhere. At the moment, we're up a piece for 2 pawns, and we're also already putting pressure on d4. So, yeah, I mean, this is just, you know, a winning position for black. Now, I understand for some players, this king on g8 might be a little bit scary, but if you play this correctly, you're just winning. White here does not have the infrastructure to attack our king in any kind of crazy way. They only have 2 pieces developed. One of them has to run backwards right now, and they haven't even castled the king of their own. So, yeah, I mean, this is just great. So knight takes d5, big mistake there, because we take the bishop and we have e6. Knight takes e4. This is the 3rd most popular move. Also a mistake. We capture on e4. No matter where this knight goes, we're going to win material. I mean, if knight e5, f6, forking the knight, forking the bishop. If knight to d2, we can take on d4. If knight g1, we're still going to capture on d4. And if you want to take, that's fine. We're up a pawn here, guys. We're up a pawn, and we're putting pressure on b2. The moment you defend it, which, by the way, rook b1 is the best move for white, knight c6, ideas like bishop f5 on the way, potentially. You know, I mean, if you want to try to go after our bishop, we could let you take, or we could run away to a square like e5 or g7 if we want to keep our bishop pair. In any case, we're just up material, and white doesn't have anything good to show for it. So we just looked at the most popular move, right, of white taking knight takes d5. We also looked at knight takes e4. So we looked at the 1st and the 3rd most popular options for white. What's the 2nd most popular option? Well, this is actually the good move that white can play, one of them, and that's by taking on d5 with the pawn. Okay, now we're still going to take this bishop, but obviously if the knight was here, we have e6, and we're attacking 2 knights in that instance, but in this case, we'd just be attacking 1. So I kind of like the move of e5. Okay, we're attacking the knight on g5 still, and we're double attacking the pawn on d4. So you'll often see white maybe think about a move like knight f3, but in this case, we can take on d4. We are down a pawn, but we do have an edge in development. Okay, we can play a move like queen b6. We're threatening this knight yet again. We're threatening the pawn on b2. Yeah, there's really only one move for white here. That's okay. Anything else, black has a clear edge. Knight b3, the position is just about even. We can play a move like a5, trying to kick this knight around. We could play a move like rook d8. Notice this pawn is pinned to the queen, so, you know, we could play a move like knight c6 now. We could play a move like bishop e6, putting more pressure on that pawn because the pawn can't take, right? It can't take because the queen is there. And if you try to solve this by running away with the queen, well, now you have one less defender for that pawn on d5, right? I mean, we could even think about something like knight a6 and knight b4, attacking the queen and attacking the pawn yet again. So, you know, all that to say, when we go back to that move of d5, there's a lot of options here, as we can see, you know, castling kingside, knight e4, knight c6 against a quiet move like bishop e2. If you see something like bishop g5, I personally think knight e4 immediately really puts a ton of pressure on white, and there's so many different chest opening tricks and traps that can help us win games fast in that instance. What if we see a move like c takes d5? Well, in this case, we capture back with the knight. Our opponent has an isolated pawn. We don't. Okay, and some players like playing with isolated pawns. I have never liked it myself. An isolated pawn does give you space. It can give you breakthroughs in the center at some point, but at least in my experience, I've had a hard time holding on to my isolated pawn, and I've also enjoyed playing against it, because in this kind of position here, there ain't no pawn that can kick our knight out, right? If you want to kick that knight out, you got to play something like bishop c4, and in this case, we could play a move like knight b6, but the engine here likes knight takes c3, and we, you know, black here performs pretty well after this. We're going to take on c3. Notice you still have an isolated pawn. It's just on the edge of the board now. We can play queen c7, attacking your bishop. Queen b3 is pretty popular. In that case, let's castle kingside. Put the rook to defend that pawn on f7 as well. Castling kingside, we can play knight c6. We have a big threat here. If white here just goes, you know what, I'm going to take the file or something like that, knight a5, we are forking the queen and the bishop. You might as well get something for the bishop. So, okay, and if you do that, play queen d5, maybe you're hoping to attack us. We play e6, and white here is just, you're just down material. You're just down material. I mean, there's not much more to add. So knight a5 is a big threat. That's why usually white will play a move like bishop g3 here. But now we can play bishop e6. D5, big mistake. Okay, you are forking 2 pieces, but now we attack your queen, getting one of the forked pieces out of the way. And yeah, I mean, if you want to play any of the following queen moves, I mean, let's just take the pawn. We're cool with that. The only way that you can hold on to this pawn is by playing queen b5, but after a6, you got to run away with your queen anyways. This is just not sustainable. You can't keep defending this pawn. At some point, you're going to lose it. You're going to be down a pawn, and black's going to have an advantage in development and an advantage in activity, and white's going to have more weaknesses. So going back to bishop e6, that is, you know, probably why queen c2 is the most popular move here. In that case, we have rook ac8, yet again, another threat from black. If we see something like h3, just some kind of move. Knight b4. Okay, if you want to take, we capture back with the queen. Very active game there. We're going to end up with a rook on the 2nd rank, just looking to wipe out stuff. If queen d2, we take on d3, bishop c4. We are skewering the queen to the rook, and we're about to go up the exchange. So that probably, you know, shows why queen e2 is the most popular move there, but we still have knight a5. We can throw a knight into c4. Again, if you want to take, we capture back. We're going to go up the exchange. And if you don't take, you got to deal with a knight on c4. That is extremely active. Yeah, just overall a great game there for black. So again, when it comes to the pterodactyl, we're looking to fiend kettle our bishop quickly and then strike in the center with c5 against that d4, c4, knight c3 setup. Let's take a look. So we see that move d4. We have g6, right? We play bishop g7. Against knight c3, we strike with c5. Now, as covered in part 1, again, I'll leave a link to that in the description below. If white captures, we take on c3. We're going to give white isolated and triple isolated pawns. And if a move like e3, let's take. Play a move like knight f6. We covered a lot of different things that our opponent can do, but I just want to go over this line to finish out the video, just so you can kind of have that kind of, you know, basic line that you can memorize and then kind of build your branches from there, right? Build that tree trunk variation and then go from there. If something like knight f3, let's play d5. Let's strike in the center ourselves. We have 2 central pawns. They only have 1. Yeah, if you take, okay, fine. 1-on-1 in the center, but your pawn is isolated. Ours is not. There's a lot of ways that white can misplay this and just have a big weakness on d4. Now, bishop c4, on the other hand, that's a good move. Okay, that's a good way to play with that isolated pawn. In this case, though, we can take, and of course, you don't have an isolated pawn now, but we are able to play queen c7, castle kingside, knight c6, looking towards knight a5, kick the queen around. Knight a5 can be on the way, but we want to start out with rook ac8 to start, just forming a battery ram on that file, right? Start looking at something like knight b4. And if white gets the heck out of the way, okay, let's play knight a5, throw a knight in there, black there with a great game coming out of the pterodactyl. I'll see y'all over in part 3. What's up, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate y'all a ton. And if you haven't subscribed before, you know, just a quick reminder, you know, to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that bell as well. If you're wanting more content like this to help you improve in your game and all that kind of stuff. And real quickly as well, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of June in 2024. I appreciate y'all a ton. You guys are helping me do this full time. And yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked it out before, I highly recommend that you go check out some of the benefits that you gain by becoming a member. And I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.